Hello and welcome to everybody who's joining us today. You are at MIT Lincoln Laboratories, the Future of Humanitarian Technology webinar. As we get started, I wanted to be sure that you know we welcome your thoughts and your questions. So if you have a thought or a discussion point, please put that in the chat function. And if you signed in with just a nickname or your first name, we ask that if you submit a question to the Q&A function, please put your full name in along with your question. That's so our speakers will be able to respond to you. Each of the speakers will have time to take a few questions after their talk, but if we don't have time to get to your questions, the speaker will be able to contact you via your email you use to register in the coming days. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to John Pitts, leader of the Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Systems Group at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. So welcome everyone, and over to you, John.
Great, thank you, Misha, and welcome everybody. We're very excited that you can join us for the first in what ultimately will be a series of presentations to discuss innovative ways that advanced technologies can address some of the world's most pressing humanitarian, disaster, climate, and energy challenges. For this inaugural session today, we're going to discuss three topics over the next hour that are inherently connected and linked to each other: climate change, disaster response, and global health. We'll start today with a discussion about climate change, where Deb Campbell will help to define tools that can help accelerate our response to a changing climate, with a particular focus on quantitative systems analysis and a new concept of proving grounds that can aid the evaluation and transition of technologies into operation. We'll then switch to Mr. Chad Council, and he will discuss an end-to-end system for responding to disasters using advanced remote sensing technologies and an architecture that can meet or exceed emergency managers' requirements during disaster response. And then we'll end this hour with a discussion with Kajal Claypool about revolutionizing global health capabilities and defining the power of harmonizing global data and the use of artificial intelligence to provide disease detection and mitigation capabilities that are unlike anything that we have today. As always, we welcome your feedback and comments. As Misha said, feel free to put questions into the Q&A tab at the bottom. Add comments into the chat, and we'll do our best to consolidate and answer as many as we can today. And if we don't get to them, as Misha said, we'll circle back with you after the event as well. So let's start off the hour with Dr. Deb Campbell, who is a chemist by training and is now a senior staff member of the Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Systems Group here at the laboratory. She's also a former member of the laboratory's Chief Technology Office, and she'll be discussing some thoughts about accelerating our ability to respond and mitigate the effects of climate change. So Deb, over to you.
Thanks for that introduction, John. It's great to be here with all of you today. Imagine the world in 2050 if we continue with business as usual. There will be over 143 million internally displaced migrants. 70% of the world's population will live in cities. That's equivalent to adding a New York City every month for the next 40 months. We'll also face more deaths that are attributable to air pollution due to the increase in population and urbanization. More people will be exposed to deadly heat waves. Severe droughts are going to lead to longer and more devastating wildfire seasons and widespread water shortages. And the US is going to face more frequent severe storm surges and flooding, as we saw with Hurricane Harvey. So what do we need to do now? Well, we need to continue to observe the climate, predict future climate change and the impacts, and watch for tipping points, including more rapid ice melt and sea level rise, as well as thawing permafrost. We also need to mitigate the drivers. We need to decarbonize. We need greener energy sources, better storage, greener fuels, and more nature-based sequestration, as well as carbon capture and storage technologies. At the same time that we're working on decarbonizing, there's a lot we're going to need to adapt to and adapt even better to as we move forward in time. We're going to need better early warning systems, better disaster response, recovery, and resiliency systems. You'll hear about one today. We're going to need greener infrastructure in our cities to help address urban heat islands. And we are also going to need more resilient infrastructure and more managed retreat. So what kind of tools do we have available to accelerate our response to the climate challenge and reach net zero by 2050? Because the timeline's so short and the challenges are so complex, it's going to be essential to make good evidence-based decisions on how to get where we need to go. We need to work to understand these highly challenging problems, their complexities, and the intervening factors, identify what we already know how to do, and where we have gaps and need capability and technology development to address those gaps. We call this approach systems analysis and architecture. And this is a really important and well-proven tool for tackling complex challenges, and it can help us address the complex challenges that we face with climate change. Out of this approach can come us information on how to address these challenges in the form of a climate mitigation blueprint. This includes what we already know how to do that we need a lot more of that we can deploy now, and identifies areas where we have gaps and research and development is needed to address those gaps. And where we need research and development and technology innovation, we also need regional proving grounds. Regional proving grounds are a crucial part of this toolkit as they provide a way to rigorously and transparently assess new ideas, test and evaluate technologies at the proof of concept and prototype level, as well as at the systems level under the pressures of real-world conditions. The proving grounds provide an opportunity to showcase the technology development to potential users, investors, and can help drive additional funding and investment and more widespread deployment. The proving grounds need to be tied into the research and development and innovation base in the local region. Potential partners include the state, the government, and the state government laboratories and local innovators, both in academia and in the industry base. And it's important that we tailor these strategies regionally so these proving grounds have a regional focus, because different regions of the country have different challenges that need to be met and different resources that we can take advantage of. By adopting this approach, we create a climate resilience roadmap that's a national roadmap. So let's take a look at some of the potential proving grounds around the potential regional proving grounds around the country, and some of the challenges that are faced regionally and some of the opportunities that we can harness to help address those challenges. If we look to the northeastern United States and focus on Massachusetts, we have a significant coastal region, and we also are in a colder climate. There's great opportunity to harvest wind energy. We have an older infrastructure, and so we have more challenges with the need to upgrade our infrastructure to meet future electricity demand. We're also going to face continued pressure to adapt to sea level rise and shoreline erosion. As we move to the southwestern US and take a look at Arizona, their challenges are quite different than what we're seeing in Massachusetts. They have low cloud cover, a much warmer climate, and more open spaces. They can significantly expand their solar energy generation. They face challenges of more severe wildfires and needing better early warning systems. And they're also going to already are and will continue to face severe water shortages, and they're going to need more efficient use of those precious water resources, as well as new technologies like the one shown here to harvest water from air. If we look to the West Coast and California, this is a very geographically diverse state. There are great opportunities for more solar, offshore wind, and also geothermal that's shown here. California has a number of challenges. One is the very complex transportation urban infrastructure, as well as ensuring an adequate water supply to meet people's needs. And also because it's the top agriculture producing state in the country, they need to ensure that they have water to be able to continue to play that kind of role. So I want to emphasize that, this is an approach that's extensible across the country. We're just showing 3 potential regions where this approach could be started, but it is an extensible effort. So far, we've talked more generally. Let's take a look at a specific problem, keeping in mind that this approach can be applied to many of the climate problems we face. Moving from our current vehicle fleet to zero emission vehicles by 2050 is a really challenging problem. There's many interrelated challenges, and as you know, we're on an aggressive timeline. Here, we're showing a small sampling of the things that we need, and some need to converge at the same time. So we need to manage our efforts very carefully to avoid potential bottlenecks. If we look at 2021, and our current fleet is predominantly internal combustion engines with some hybrids and a little over 2% EVs. We can't roll out a lot more EVs without more green electricity generation, associated infrastructure, and more charging stations. And we also need to ensure that this is being done in a just and equitable way. We're also going to need to continue to improve vehicle fuel efficiency, given the number of combustion engines we're going to have on the road as we move toward our 2050 goal. As we move toward 2030 and 2050, there are things that we're going to need that are going to require investment in research and development and evaluation. We're going to need bridge fuels. These are greener fuels that will help us while we transition from combustion engines to EVs. We're going to need batteries with higher capacity and faster charging. And as we continue to grow the fleet even further, there's going to be an even greater demand for batteries that's going to put pressure on the materials that they're built out of, and we're going to need a move to more sustainable battery materials. In addition, we're going to likely need hydrogen fuel cells and a hydrogen infrastructure for being able to use those fuel cells, particularly as we go to medium duty and heavy duty vehicles. So we need to continuously assess technology development, identify the best path forward to drive investments. There may be some new advances and breakthroughs. I only have a very small number of the kinds of things that we need to do here that begin to look promising. And by the time we get to the end of this roadmap, there may be new ideas and technologies that emerge that will play an important role. So in summary, what I've talked about here today is how we can get to a better future, and we need smart and strategic investments and an approach like the one described here to ensure a decreased time to widespread deployment of climate mitigation technologies. We need to invest now and continue to invest in systems analysis and architecture and a plan for action, a climate mitigation blueprint that lets us know what we have readily available that we can more widely use now and have more widespread deployment across the regions and across the country, and areas where we need research and development to address capability and technology gaps. And proving grounds, the regional proving grounds, are going to be a very important part of this toolkit. They're critical to supporting the development and evaluation of these new technologies and capabilities, demonstrating that they work under real world conditions, and driving further investments needed to scale up. This is an ongoing and iterative process. Some technologies may advance more quickly to widespread deployment, but many are going to take much longer as we work toward 2030 and 2050. This powerful approach to tackling complex, challenging problems can help ensure a better future for the United States and the world. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Hey, Deb, thank you. We had some great questions come in during your talk. So let's first start with this one. Are there any examples of proving grounds being used to facilitate technology research and development and deployment as you described in your talk?
Thanks for that question, Misha. There are examples. The Department of Defense has used proving grounds in a very similar way to look at capabilities and technologies as they're developed, both at the proof of concept and prototype level and systems level. It's really a crucial part of developing the technology, getting stakeholder input, and making sure that it works under real world conditions. Also, when we think about the climate challenge, California has really been at the forefront for the US, and they do have a transportation testbed that they stood up fairly recently out of the California school system in conjunction with national labs in the state. So we would look there to learn some of the great lessons learned to help inform how we can do this across the country.
Thank you. Another question, because you had mentioned California in that example. Last week, governors from dozens of states, including California and here the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we are living, these states asked the president to expedite the timeline for zero emission vehicle sales from what you showed in your presentation. Can the approach that you described accommodate this even more aggressive timeline?
I saw that announcement in the letter to the president, and that actually applies to a more aggressive timeline for light duty vehicles and also medium duty and heavy duty. And I think that kind of ask and that the recognition of how important it's going to be to expedite things even further just makes the approach that I talked about here even more important. Yes, we can use this approach to meet that aggressive timeline, and actually we're going to need to be very systematic and smart about our investments and our technology evaluations to meet an even more aggressive timeline.
Thank you. Another question that has to do with populations. And so we understand, as I read this question, climate change mitigation, climate change mitigation can actually, the climate change can impact climate change mitigation. So with that in mind, the person posing the question is curious about where you see a nexus of opportunity to shield populations.
That's an excellent question. I think that when I think about populations, I think about health impacts of climate change, people being displaced due to climate change. I think that as we go through these analyses, and I can answer that question from the United States perspective, but also from the global perspective, that's actually something really important that we need to take account of. We need to think about where people are relocating to make sure that it makes sense for them to go to those regions, and those regions are well designed for them to relocate to. So we need more intentional planning and designing. And we also need to make sure that it's been done in an environmentally just and fair way, and that we take health impacts into account.
Thank you, Deb. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions. For those of you where Deb was not able to get to your question today, she will have the opportunity to follow up with you after that. But for now, we're going to move on to Mr. Chad Council, who's a technical staff member at Lincoln Laboratory. Chad uses his years of experience in working in the disaster response domain to be a thought leader and a driver of change. and he helps the laboratory think of how we can use technology to advance the disaster response space. With that, it's over to you, Chad.
Great, thank you, Misha. Just to confirm, you can see my slides okay. You all are about to see a data visualization of the major natural disasters that occurred in the United States during 2020. The US experiences more natural disasters than any other country in the world, and we also spend more money on disasters than any other nation. In the last 10 years alone, we have spent over $800 billion on disaster response and recovery. Our annual death rate ranges from the hundreds to thousands. A typically federally declared disaster takes an average of 7 years from the incident to fully recovering and being closed out, with some taking more than 20 years to recover from. At the core of disaster support is really information and knowing where the impacts are and the severity of those impacts, which can drive the decisions about the quantity and types of resources to be brought into the disaster area in order to scale your life-saving and life-sustaining efforts, and also lay the groundwork for a successful recovery. And we have no indication that the frequency or severity of disasters will decline in the future. But we do know our approach is too slow and too costly to really sustain for the years to come. But imagine this, in 2030, we could reduce the human suffering experienced because of disasters, saving more lives, greatly shortening recovery times, and reducing costs by leveraging state-of-the-art technology in a way that supports survivors, volunteers, and emergency managers at every level of government. By 2030, we can achieve a deep understanding of a disaster situation through an open architecture that combines data from sensors, either already in place or deployed early on in the response, ground field observations from responders and survivors, modeling, and all done according to defined requirements. In this architecture, we can push well-characterized and trusted artificial intelligence to the edge as close as possible to where the data is collected and distributing the analytics and linking them all through standard messaging, all of which delivers critical information to the people who need it, whether that's the emergency manager, a volunteer, or a survivor. A distributed and open data architecture results in fewer silos and less duplication of effort. This is a future we can build. In fact, the numerous technologies required are emerging, but they aren't converging in a way that encourages integration and a holistic solution. For example, unmanned aerial systems are emerging everywhere, supporting small scale and tactical operations. But in a large disaster, there needs to be a way to aggregate their many local observations to gain a common understanding of wide area impacts. Field observations are broadly collected by responders or even self-reported by survivors today, but getting those observations out of the field and into the remote operation centers in a way that is useful can still be a challenge. Robust communication backbones and common data formats can help solve that challenge. The application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to the disaster space is definitely accelerating, as is the availability of new sensors for these algorithms to run against. Communicating algorithm performance remains somewhat cryptic, so there needs to be an easy and common way to characterize a system of a sensor and an algorithm together in a way that the emergency management community can understand the source of the information and how accurate it is. This is a great opportunity for policymakers to define their tolerance for risk in leveraging these new systems. Is an 85% accurate solution good enough if it's available in the first 12 to 24 hours? Algorithm developers need to broaden their efforts beyond accurate damage observations and also be able to account for bias and equity in their results. Answering questions such as, is the community properly reflected through the data that is available? And has this algorithm been trained equitably? What could drive this convergence is a national remote sensing program as a way to focus all of these efforts toward a common vision. We've developed a framework for what a national remote sensing program could look like. We envision a small network of powerful airborne multimodal remote sensing platforms available for rapid deployment to disasters across the United States or internationally. And they could also be available for steady state initiatives such as regional climate observations. Such a platform would serve as the bridge between research and development and operations. We imagine building a transferable pod containing the most advanced sensors across the electromagnetic spectrum. This approach enables a novel multimodal sensing and exploitation approach that has not really been possible before. We envision partners in this effort to be entities such as the National Guard, as they are available through existing mechanisms for federal, state, local, or international missions. By coupling these advanced sensors with edge computing and state-of-the-art AI and machine learning, we enable in-flight analytics that detect and communicate major observations to the ground, supporting immediate life-saving efforts such as wide area search and rescue, or determining the transportation status at a citywide scale. The data collected can then be used for highly accurate and automated virtual damage assessments during recovery. More lives can be saved with real-time in-flight analytics. Recovery times can be reduced by automating and virtualizing damage assessments, and operational costs are reduced through fewer collections and broadly adopted automation. Such an approach provides an ideal testbed for ongoing research as well, pushing those boundaries for new sensors, building comprehensive analytics, and refining a national data to decision architecture. So to be clear, there's no one-size-fits-all sensor platform. Space platforms are attractive because of their unmatched area coverage rates, but disaster use can be limited by their orbit times, cloud cover, or difficulty accessing their data. Small to medium disasters may be supported by organizations like the Civil Air Patrol. And our proposal incorporates their imagery and analytics into a broader national data to decision architecture. So for a small disaster, it might be faster for the local Department of Transportation to fly some small drones, or even just drive down the street to document the damage firsthand. The key is, if large-scale remote sensing analytics are developed to produce the same data inputs that a local DOT is used to, then when a major disaster overwhelms that community, the incoming data from remote sensing is familiar and trusted. Research and development across all of these platforms should definitely continue, but with an eye towards tailoring the analytical outputs to integrate with each other as part of a national architecture. If we get started now, we can beat that 2030 timeframe. A prototype remote sensing asset can be built in the next 2 years in collaboration between FEMA, the National Guard Bureau, and federally funded research and development centers. In parallel, the initial data analytics and access infrastructure can be built and proliferated to all emergency managers, sparking early engagement and feedback. This effort must involve the disaster community to drive the requirements and gain their trust in such a system. This also must involve academia to a great extent, not only actively participating in the development of the tools and techniques, but in the operations as well, becoming part of a distributed analytics architecture. Once established, the US can leverage the entire system to support climate observation, urban planning, agricultural health, many possible uses. As the algorithms are refined over time, they can be transitioned to the other partners who are already participating in remote sensing supported disasters, such as NOAA or NASA or the Civil Air Patrol, all enabling a robust and cohesive national remote sensing strategy. We envision 4 years of operational testing and the well-proven sensor combinations, analytics, and architecture being transitioned to government, industry, and academia to be employed by the end of 2029, making the nation ready for 2030. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to continuing the discussion, starting with some questions. Misha?
There is clearly a lot to discuss here. And so let's start with this question. You described a multimodal sensing platform. There are a lot of different sensors out there. What are the sensing modalities that you would recommend for such a platform?
So that's sort of at the crux of it. What are you trying to collect over a disaster impacted area? And we sort of look at it as trying to recreate the physical world in 3 dimensions, but also adding in scientific context to make analysis from. So we would look at both active and passive sensors. And on the passive sensing side, you definitely want some sort of color imaging for context, because that's the most consumable by humans. Now, a lot of the analytics, ultimately, the person consuming that doesn't ever need to see the original data, right? They just need to know the bridge is out at this intersection. Beyond color, you would want to get into the infrared so that you could look at vegetation and thermal. So you can look at finding people, for example, that are lost or trapped. And on the active side, we'd be looking at kind of a combination of a high area coverage rate LiDAR, like a Geiger mode, and also some form of synthetic aperture radar, where you can get volumetric measurements.
Yeah, thank you. Another question came in terms of, one approach to, somebody wrote a question and it just moved what I was looking at. I apologize for that. So somebody asked a question that when trying to have an impact, one way is to start off small and then go big. So how can we make these maybe small kind of new open architectures that are tailored toward local communities first? Or do you think that it's important to start with this national level architecture?
That's actually a really kind of powerful question, because it hints at how emergency management happens in the United States with this tiered government response. And a lot of the things that what I've seen at the federal level have come from best practices that even local levels have been conducting. So I would say that it needs to be a mix. The conversation needs to be national, I would say, so that so any given disaster, if it's big enough, resources from the outside come into an area to provide support. So the resources coming in from another part of the country have to at least be familiar with some of the things happening in that local area. So you could kind of see a consortium of many local efforts, but all trying to move towards commonality. And the standards are really a big part of this, I think. In what are the observation schemas? What are your damage categories? That's already an unanswered question. Yeah. So
I'm going to ask one more question. As we see a newly fraught, quote, steady state rife with disasters that require PDD, do you envision a solution for conceptualizing the interface of steady state agencies like HUD, USDA, and kind of that wider federated agencies that exist, and emergency partners kind of coming together?
I mean, yeah, that sounds awesome, right? So from a technical implementation perspective, I kind of hinted at it somewhat in the one of the architecture diagrams. If you look at sensors that are deployed today, and even the additional, like river gauges as an example, right? So this is a piece of technology that's monitoring steady state by many, many parties. And when they trip a certain level, more people get involved. And it's sort of this known input of information. And being able to do that, more broadly to the steady state partners, I think that would take a lot of work, but it would, and it'd be absolutely a way to go. I want to think about that more.
Nice. Well, thank you, Chad. I think those answers are really helpful as we think about some of these enduring challenges in the disaster response space. Thank you to everybody who posed a question. Again, Chad will be able to follow up with you kind of after this event. But for the sake of time, it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Kajal Claypool. Kajal is a senior researcher at MIT Lincoln Laboratory who applies her expertise in AI, data, and informatics to address global challenges. Join me in welcoming Dr. Kajal Claypool. Kajal, over to you.
Thank you so much, Misha, and thank you everybody for being here today. Appreciate it. So I want you to fast forward about 9-ish years or so. Imagine that it is August 2030, and we have a new variant of the SARS-CoV-2 virus emerging in Hanoi, and COVID-30 is spreading across the globe. Now imagine Hurricane Omega has wreaked havoc, and we are seeing record numbers of chikungunya, Zika, and malaria cases in US, Central, and South Americas. And now imagine we have a new outbreak of Ebola in Guinea and Liberia, and that first carrier has flown into Atlanta, and we have Ebola spread in the United States. Now, what if we are able to bring together data from existing syndromic surveillance systems and are able to mine additional data, social media, news media, environmental conditions, and have sophisticated artificial intelligence to predict the impact of that virus and are able to cordon off the area and stop that mutated virus from ever leaving the wet market of Hanoi? What if you are once again able to quickly bring together information, but this time on weather, housing density, land geography, information on other risk factors for the vector-borne diseases, and are able to use your artificial intelligence to predict the intensity of the hurricane and the potential chikungunya and malaria hotspots down to a geolocation, and have the luxury of days to prepare the right controlled interventions. And imagine, you are now able to include data on political unrest and potential migration in the population, and can use your AI to carefully allocate your limited resources and optimize the care of the population and stop the spread of the virus while keeping your healthcare workers safe. And that first carrier never gets on the airplane. From an AI perspective, individually, none of these are a far stretch. We have AI models that mine social media, disease risk factors, and public health reports to track the spread of flu. We have technology to sequence the virus and predict its potential to spread. We have several models that have been developed for COVID-19 forecasting just in the past year. So why are we not there yet? Well, I would say that while AI has been used to tackle many of these problems, these are one-off siloed solutions, and they're often developed in high-income nations. We need to break these silos and have these capabilities available for low and middle-income nations. To do that, we must address 3 key challenges. We need to first understand holistically the gaps in our data, both at a local level as well as at a global level, that would allow us to stop that virus from ever leaving that wet market in Hanoi. And equally, we need to understand the degradation in our prediction capability if some of that information is missing. We need harmonized data. The backbone of all AI models is cleaned, integrated, harmonized, and labeled data. Today, this is done as a one-off. For example, there is an AI model to predict malaria hotspots in Thailand that uses weather data, density of houses, environmental surveillance data, which can include information on sanitation facilities, standing water, waste management, as well as other risk factors for the disease in the area. Well, to develop this model, a group of scientists cleaned that data, integrated it, labeled it, did quality assurance on it so that they could build that hotspot prediction model. To scale this model across the globe, how do we scale this data harmonization and cleaning? We believe that the lack of harmonized data is one of the biggest impediments for bringing AI to bear on global health. The last challenge is that of biases in AI. Let's stick with malaria as an example. We know that there are effective interventions for malaria, bed nets, insecticides, repellents, but with a continuously dwindling budget, how can public officials and policymakers know what to use, where and when to be most effective? Researchers have used open malaria simulations and agent-based models to determine and propose the most effective intervention strategies. But are there ethnic, cultural, socioeconomic, gender biases in the AI that was developed? Are men less likely to use a mosquito than women and children? Are there cultural biases that make one intervention preferable in Thailand versus in Bangladesh versus in Kenya? Today, we are putting forth a technical plan that requires collaborations, partnerships, funding, and vision to, one, develop robust sensing capabilities that from high resolution sensing assets to low resolution text or social media messages that may be more universally available. Two, we want to be able to provide harmonized data, but we also need a solution that respects the autonomy and privacy of the data owners, whether they be an individual hospital or a host nation. We believe the right solution is to build a federated, open, and secure data platform where data can be shared across multiple stakeholders and multiple nations, but without the loss of control at the nation, state, or the stakeholder level. This will require innovative methods for data processing, harmonization, labeling, and effective use. Three, we need to establish an AI platform to both develop AI that is resilient, interpretable, and equitable. AI that degrades gracefully with incomplete information, but lets its users know how certain it is on the accuracy of that information. AI that can be tested across geographic, race, ethnicity boundaries, and can be equally brought to bear in low and middle income nations. Over the next few years, we propose the development of a global health AI platform that aims to address these challenges and collaboratively, as a community, build that platform one disease and one region at a time. We are using malaria here as an example. As many of you know, malaria kills 1.2 million people annually, and poorly designed irrigation and water systems, inadequate housing, poor waste disposal and water storage, deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and many more impacts of climate change that you've heard from Deb and natural disasters that you've heard from Chad are all contributing factors for the spread of malaria. While there are a number of interventions, including emergent vaccines, prediction of hotspots, and decision support that provides for the right intervention for the right geolocation is completely essential. So we are proposing the development of a proof of concept system, sort of a vertical slice of the architecture I showed in the previous chart, to predict malaria and interventions in a specific region in the first year. And then expand the predictive AI and modeling and simulation capabilities, both geographically as well as broaden the disease space to include all vector-borne diseases. The next major milestone would then be to expand this platform to provide data-driven diagnostics and interventions across the globe for other disease conditions, from detecting retinopathy using mobile devices to using AI to detect pneumonia, tuberculosis, and more, to providing AI tools to community workers to manage healthcare in underserved communities. This is an ambitious but achievable vision. It needs the right collaborations, investments, partnerships, and trust to push forward. We ask you to join us in making this a reality and in helping develop an AI platform to reduce the transmission of disease and save lives globally. With that, I thank you very much for being here and for your time, and I am happy to take a few questions. Over to you, Misha.
Thank you. And thank you for your talk. It's clear that this community of participants has a lot of thoughts and questions. I know that you'll be able to follow up with some people afterwards, but until then, here's a really interesting question. Until global data is harmonized, do you see the role for those AI-based models that you were talking about? That is, can you leverage that data to fill the gaps and make useful predictions?
That's a great question. And the short answer is, well, yes and no, right? If you can't bring the data together, so let's start with a region and one particular problem. You have to be able to integrate, not necessarily harmonize, integrate data from multiple data sources to be able to build out that AI for a particular region, for a particular disease. But now, if you wanted to take that same model and apply it for other regions, or let's say for other regions, then you need to be able to have sort of a global way of representing your data, and that is what harmonization is. So the yes, you can build the AI, but the no, because I don't think that you can actually scale it globally without that harmonization.
So there are some really good questions coming in that have to do with this, the harmonizing of data, and also where that meets issues around protection. So here's a question. What do you consider to be the greatest barrier to obtaining global harmonized data? Along that line of thought, as democracies are often threatened across the globe, how would we protect the massive breadths of data from being misused to potentially target minority or underdeveloped or underprivileged communities in regions of concern?
That is sort of an excellent question. And one of the things that I tried to sort of stress in as I was talking, that trust is a huge foundation for actually building this, right? There needs to be sort of, from a behavioral perspective, right, from a policy perspective, you need to have trust that the data won't be misused. The second aspect of this, and I think your thought was on, I think the first part of this question was, how do you actually do that global harmonization? And I would say that that requires collaboration, right? That requires communities of interest to come together to build sort of that global schema, if you will, so that you can begin to do the harmonization. And it has to be something, there has to be a person, there has to be a group, somebody driving it, but there need to be partners to actually come together so that it can be applied more globally. Yeah.
Well, with that, there are two questions that all combine. And so one is, who do you imagine would, in essence, be running this a platform like this? So that's on one aspect. And then kind of supporting that question, another question came in of how would other people or institutions actually be able to contribute to that?
So to the first part, I think going back to that notion of trust again, right? I think that this has to be owned by a neutral group, right? So this platform maybe belongs at the UN or the World Health Organization, but somebody neutral, everybody across the globe can actually trust. To your second part of the question, in terms of contributions, I think there are many, many, many opportunities for contributions and collaborations. Some of the top ones, you can contribute by helping build that federated model of data sharing, right? Not saying that you bring that data and put it in a central location, but you own your data. But let's talk about what are the right protocols that are needed to be able to engage in that conversation. You can contribute as a technologist. Let's say that we have harmonized data available. We need the AI experts to come in and be able to build out those AI models so that they are interpretable. They can degrade gracefully, right? And we need the technologists, the AI specialists to bring that in. We need the policy experts to come in here, the public health people to come in here and say, what are the things that they need out of that system? How can they contribute what their requirements are into the system? So that's sort of touching into three spaces, but there are many more.
And with this, and this will be our final question for you, but it goes on, when we're looking at other spaces and other domains, standards and harmonization seem to exist in the likes of communication, like GSM and Bluetooth were the examples given. And it sounds like you are advocating for something similar in health. But do you see any impediments in the comparison of health to communications?
So absolutely. That is exactly right on what I'm advocating here. We need those standards. And the reason why we have standards for communications like GSM, Bluetooth, there is an economy behind that drives that standard. We need to find what that right economy is to drive these standards for health. And I would say that if nothing else, the past year has shown us that if we can't come together as a community and work towards this vision, we definitely have a lot of economic stresses to deal with. So maybe that'll provide the impetus from an economic perspective as well.
Kajal, thank you. It's always tough to be the person to have to break up a really interesting discussion that's happening. I do want to thank, again, everybody who submitted a question. And just as a reminder, our speakers will be able to follow up with you directly. So thank you for taking the time to ask those questions. And we're hoping to keep these conversations going. But in the sake of time, I will pull back and hand it back over to Dr. John Pitts for some closing thoughts. John, over to you.
Great, thank you, Misha, and thank you, Chad and Kajal and Deb, for all your hard work and thought and critical thinking that went into the presentations that you made. And I want to thank everybody that joined the webinar today as well. One of the goals we have here ultimately is to build collaborations and open some communication with a broader community around all of these topics. They're all terribly important and terribly complex and are going to require significant global effort to really make a difference. So we welcome continued discussion and communication around any of these topics. You'll see as we're ending here, everybody that gave a talk and Misha, who helped moderate, their email addresses are available to you, and we'd be very glad if you wanted to reach out. As Misha said already a couple of times, we will follow up and answer all of the questions that went into the chat, any ones that we didn't get to. And again, very thankful that you were able to join. Stay tuned for the next round of these. We're gonna start preparing for the next one, and as participants in this one, you'll also get an invitation to the next one. Feel free to join. Feel free to pass on that invitation as well if you want to. So with that, again, I'll thank our speakers again. And we'll end a few minutes early here and try to save you just a few more minutes in your day. Take care, everybody, and hope to see you all again soon.